Our chronological study of the scriptures brings us to 1 Kings chapter 20. This is the second daily video devotional for today. And the title of the devotion is Remember, God is Sovereign and the battle is the Lord's. I do want to invite you, open your Bible to 1 Kings chapter 20. Well, the Lord had commanded Elijah to anoint 3 successors. Now, 2 were to become kings of Israel and Judah, and then his replacement, Elisha, as the Lord's prophet. Well, we come to Hazael. I hope I'm saying that right. Hazael was anointed to succeed Benhadad as king of Syria in chapter 19 and verse 15. And Jehu was anointed to be king of Israel following Ahab, chapter 19 and verse 16. And then finally, Elisha was chosen by the Lord to serve as Elijah's disciple and his successor as prophet in Israel. Now let's notice 1 Kings chapter 20. And here we have the failures of King Ahab and his death foretold. Well, verses 1 through 11 of chapter 20, we begin with a moment of success. Now, the oppression imposed by the king of Syria on Israel is the subject. Now, 1 Kings 20 then recorded how Benhadad, king of Syria, oppressed and impoverished Israel. With arrogance and impunity, he humiliated King Ahab and demanded his royal treasury of silver and gold. He then abducted Ahab's wives and took his children hostage, along with the best of Israel's population, to serve as his slaves. Well, when the king of Syria increased his demands, Ahab realized that Benhadad's demands were intolerable and he would never be appeased. In other words, Benhadad would demand more and more and more. He was a tyrant. He would never be satisfied. And sadly, but surely, Ahab had come to that realization. Well, we find, beginning in verses 11 through 30, this wonderful moment where Ahab is given victory over Benhadad, the king of Syria. You see, the Lord in his grace sent a prophet to encourage Ahab to be courageous and assured him the Lord was on his side, verse 13. Well, promised victory. Despite the odds against him, Ahab withstood Benhadad in a series of 3 battles, and God gave Israel a great victory, which is recorded 1 Kings chapter 20 and verses 14 through 30. Tragically, though, Ahab's heart was lifted with pride, and when Benhadad begged for his life to be spared, the king of Israel failed to consult the Lord. He made a foolish, faithful decision. For Ahab spared Benhadad's life, his enemy, and even honored him by setting him in his chariot before the people. Well, sparing the enemy of Israel provoked the wrath of the Lord in verses 31 through 34. And he sent a man to Ahab, one described as, and I quote, of the sons of the prophets in verse 35. And what did the young prophet come to say? He confronted Ahab, and we read in verses 42 and 43, Thus saith the Lord, because thou hast let go out of thy hand a man whom I appointed to utter destruction, speaking of Benhadad, therefore thy life, Ahab, shall go for his life, and thy people for his people. And the king of Israel went to his house, we read, heavy and displeased, and he came to Samaria in verse 43. Well, a closing thought for this brief devotional, and that is that 1 Kings 20 was a spiritual crossroads for King Ahab. True to his character, he made decisions independent of the Lord and promoted his interests before the Lord and even Israel. And so I want to invite you as I close to consider with me 3 lessons that we can take from 1 Kings chapter 20. The first is found in verse 13, and that is that God is jealous of his glory and name. You see, when Ahab surrendered to Benhadad's demands and he failed to seek the Lord, he sacrificed God's best for his people. God therefore declared in verse 13, Thou shalt know that I am the Lord. We're also reminded that the Lord is sovereign over all creation. We read again that our God is the creator of the hills and the valleys. He is not, quote, the God of many, but the sovereign God of all. And he turns the hearts of kings and rulers according to his will. And then thirdly and lastly, God is just and he requires obedience. You see, Ahab's failure to kill his enemy invited the Lord's judgment on himself and Israel. And thus the king invited his own death. And Israel will suffer, sadly, a humiliating defeat. In chapter 22 that will follow, 21 and 22. And so we need to ask, what can you take from 1 Kings 20? And I think it is the question, do you seek the Lord and his will when making decisions? Do you trust man's wisdom, or do you put your faith in the Lord, knowing he is sovereign? After all, the Lord desires the best for his people. Now, let's be faithful. Trust the Lord, and he will bless us. God bless you. Thank you for being a part of our daily devotional, and bye-bye.